Are you ready to thrive? As a trauma therapist, author, yoga instructor, and healed human, I personally and professionally know what it means to live stuck in survival mode. I've learned a few things in my healing journey and my career that can help you transform into your best self. Join me, Rebecca Case, as I use neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, and personal experience to help you find the tools and techniques to thrive. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Thrive the podcast. Today, we are going to talk about what I have learned from yoga. So I'm a trained yoga instructor. I don't teach classes. I taught for a very short period of time, but I really learned yoga. I went to yoga teacher training to deepen my yoga practice, and so I could integrate it in my clinical work with my clients. Now, I walked in my first yoga class when I was 15 years old. So it has been a hot minute. I can't do math. It's been well over 20 years, obviously. I'm in my 40s, so it's been a hot minute. And set foot in my first yoga class at 15 and just really felt drawn to yoga, just the smell and the studio and the whimsy and the spiritual just kind of spoke to my soul. My sister was really athletic. She was an awesome gymnast. She played soccer, and I was just really never into those kinds of sports. And I went to yoga and I was like, oh, here's my thing. Thank goodness. Now, my yoga practice has really ebbed and flowed over my life from, times that I've been more involved in it versus times that I've been less involved with it, and how it's just integrated. And that's what I want to share with you today and help you understand all the various forms of yoga, like what yoga truly is. Newsflash, it is not about putting yourself into a pretzel, and how you might start to get into yoga and how it can benefit your life. So yoga has saved my life multiple times, literally and emotionally. So certainly as I was healing trauma, when I was broken from trauma, in some very dark times in my life, yoga was always like a home base. It was always a practice that I could find rest in, that I could find relief in, that I could find reprieve in. And I've been to a lot of different yoga studios around the country, and every yoga studio I've been to, while certainly like my nervous system prefers some studios over others, if I go to a yoga studio, I just have this kind of immediate sense of safety. I feel safe. And that's based on my experiences, because yoga is a safe experience for me. I know some of you may not have had that. I'm so sorry for that. But yoga is just like a home base. Yoga saved my life once when I was stuck in a rainstorm. My husband and I got caught in a terrible, terrible storm in the mountains one summer in Colorado. And we had made the terrible faux pas of forgetting our rain jackets, something you never, ever do in Colorado in the summer. And it was like the first and only time we'd ever forgotten our rain jackets. We got caught in this terrible storm. We had kind of gone out on this leisurely hike, and we had brought lunch, and we were going to do some rock climbing. And I also brought my yoga mat with me. I was like, yeah, I'm going to sit around and do some yoga in the woods. And it started pouring and hailing and lightning. And we were in this area that we were certainly at risk of a flash flood. And so we're cowering under this rock, and we're both soaked, and we're getting really cold. And my husband's lips are turning blue. And all I had was a yoga mat, and we draped the yoga mat over ourselves to give ourselves a little bit more protection until we could make a run for it to the car. And I mean, obviously we're fine. We survived. It was okay. It was super scary, but that yoga mat really helped us protect us from the elements. So yoga has helped me physically and emotionally multiple times in my life. Yoga's taught me a whole lot of things, I have to say. Yoga is what's really taught me how to cultivate a relationship with my body. And on another episode that I talked about, how to get right with your emotions and how to feel your feelings, I talked about the concept of interoception, which is the ability to notice your feelings and sensations, notice what's happening in your body and make some sense of it. And so yoga is a practice that has really helped me grow a lot of interoception. And my husband laughs sometimes about like what it's like to be married to somebody who is so acutely aware of their body and their nervous system. And gosh, I think that my level of awareness when it comes to noticing my body and physical sensations and what's happening in my body is one of my greatest strengths and resources in my life, and one of the greatest contributors to me being able to thrive. Yoga has also taught me how to find safety and comfort inside and with my breath. So when I feel worked up and when I feel out of it, when I feel scared and anxious, yoga has taught me to sit down, hurry up and sit, get still, breathe, and just be present. And that is also one of my greatest coping strategies when I'm feeling really turned upside down. Hurry up and sit, get still, get quiet, sit down and breathe, and just come back to home base. And home base for me really is coming back to this kind of space inside of my chest, inside of my heart. Yoga has also taught me the power of non-attachment and how to let go. And I'll get into how you can learn this in yoga, because that might be something you're like, how do you learn non-attachment when you're putting yourself into a pretzel on a yoga mat? Yoga philosophy is a treasure trove of strategies and techniques and wisdom to live your life right by. And one of the core teachings of yoga focuses on non-attachment and learning to let go of your desires and your hopes and the outcome of things. And let me be clear, like that doesn't mean that you should live a life without goals or without intentions or without hope or without desires. Like that's just not really possible. We always want to have things we're working towards and striving to achieve. But non-attachment is kind of based in this awareness that everything is impermanent. Everything will change. We all have a death sentence. None of us are making it out of this life alive. We will all get old. We will all lose our youth. People around us will change. Our relationships will change. The world will change. Society will change. We will get sick. We will be hungry again. There is a beginning and end to everything. And so when we learn to practice non-attachment, learning to let go, it doesn't mean that you're not disappointed or you're not hurt or you don't have feelings about the way things are happening in your life. But learning to practice non-attachment is a way to cultivate a mindset that, in my opinion, I'm just going to share this from my personal perspective, allows you to stay humble to the fact that there is something so much greater than you at play out there, that you are just a teeny tiny little speck on a teeny tiny little blue dot in a massive universe and galaxy, in a massive kind of outer space that we cannot even begin to wrap our minds around. And that like all of it matters and none of it matters at the same time. In all reality, like we don't matter. We really don't matter. In the perspective of time and the universe, like you're not even a sneeze. And non-attachment allows me to come back to that. And if I can live with a sense of humility and be humble in my heart, it allows me to keep my ego out of the way. It allows me to prevent myself from taking myself too seriously. It allows me to let go of things more easily rather than harp and kind of get stuck on, my desires and the outcomes and what I'm trying to achieve. Non-attachment also allows me to trust the process and to recognize that, when hard things are happening or when something doesn't go according to plan or when, I'm kind of rubbing up against the grain of life, if I can stay non-attached to, oh my gosh, this sucks. This is so hard. Like, why is this happening to me? Like that's all attachment. That's attachment to ego. That's attachment to your self-importance. That's attachment to an outcome. And so if I can practice non-attachment in those moments, what it allows me to do is stay curious and open to the other possibilities that may be unfolding in front of me. I really believe that there is opportunity in all things good and bad. And so when something isn't going according to plan for you, according to your plans, I should say, it doesn't mean doom and gloom necessarily. But if you can't practice non-attachment, you will probably make meaning of the way things are going and get stuck there. Versus if you can stay curious and allow the experience to unfold, where you actually be given a new insight or learn a new lesson or allow things to unfold in a way of, oh, that worked out just as it should have. Non-attachment is not an easy thing. It is a hard thing because we all have an ego, and your ego is important and necessary. Our egos is kind of what allows us to create boundaries and separation. And this is me and that is you. And we are not enmeshed. We are not one and the same. We are all part of a web, but this is me and this is you. But our egos can get way too big sometimes and cause us a lot of suffering when they get too big and get us really stuck. So non-attachment is, I've learned a lot from yoga, but non-attachment is a really big factor in that. So let me give you an example of how I've had to practice non-attachment as my yoga practice has evolved over time. As my yoga practice has kind of ebbed and flowed, I went through a period in my life in which I had a very dedicated asana practice. So asana is one of the 8 limbs of yoga. There are 8 limbs of yoga, kind of meaning there are 8 different ways to practice yoga. Asana is physical practice. So when you think of yoga as, somebody on a mat who's doing some specific pose or posture with their body, that is asana, one of the 8 limbs. So I used to have a very strong asana practice. I would go practice in the studio pretty regularly, and I practiced at home every single day. And I had a very rigorous practice, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when I couldn't go to the gym or I couldn't go to the studio. I really got into my yoga practice because it was a way for me to work through all the fears and anxieties that was happening in 2020. It was a little bit of an escape for me, I'll be honest. And it was a place that I felt some control and I felt empowered on my mat. And it was also a great workout. So I practiced asana very rigorously. Love to practice putting myself into pretzels and challenging myself and doing all those things. That's great. Awesome, right? So then fast forward a couple of years later, I got diagnosed with arthritis in both of my feet, and I couldn't practice asana in that way anymore. Moving quickly like that, having bare feet, like that got really painful. I had to wear shoes all the time. And I remember one of my podiatrists was like, if you go to yoga class, you need to wear sneakers, you need to wear shoes. And I was like, they don't let you in the yoga studio with shoes on. So I couldn't practice in that way anymore. And I went through this period of just feeling really sad and feeling a loss and just having this question of like, who am I without this yoga practice? And as I was going through that, because I had learned about non-attachment and I had practiced that, I was able to really recognize, oh, like I am attached to an outcome here. I am attached to what this asana practice looks like. And I've attached to it in a way that I identify with it, like it's part of my identity. And I know from my yoga teacher training that that is attachment, and it's probably not going to help me and serve me. In fact, as I was trying to reconcile with what it meant to have arthritis in both of my feet at the early age of like 38, I was just really struggling with the loss and the change in my identity. And that was tripping me up. That was making everything a lot harder. So I could recognize that. And I was like, okay, this is an edge for me to work on. Like this is part of my growth in this arthritis diagnosis. I cannot will arthritis away. I don't know exactly why I have it because I didn't have any kind of markers that my doctor would say, yeah, it's no wonder you have arthritis at 38. My doctor's all been like, I don't know why you have arthritis at 38. That seems strange. Doesn't run in my family necessarily, but anyway, that's beside the point. So I couldn't fight the fact that I had arthritis, right? Like I had to figure out how to accept that. And I had to figure out how to accept that through non-attachment by letting go of my identity. I had to let go of all of my shoes, y'all. Like that was part of it. I had to let go of all of my shoes. I had to travel with a boot for a year because my arthritis in one of my feet would flare up so bad. So I literally, whenever I would travel, I'd have a second suitcase just for my boot. I had to get rid of so many shoes. That was so hard. And then I had to wear orthotics for years. Oh my gosh. That was also really hard to grapple with. Like my identity of, oh my gosh, like I have to wear orthotic shoes. I'm only 38 years old. It was so hard. Right. And that whole time I was like, non-attachment, Rebecca, non-attachment, Rebecca. It doesn't mean that practicing non-attachment is easy. It's just like, I know the lesson here and I'm going to show up to it, and it's still hard and it sucks and I have feelings about it. So you can have all of that at the same time. So as I just allowed myself to go through the process and I bowed down to it and I resigned from, got to get rid of all your heels, got to get rid of those cute boots. Can't go to the yoga studio anymore to go to vinyasa class, like vinyasa 1 and 2 and 3 levels. You can still go to yin yoga. I mean, all these things. I had to allow the process to happen to me, for me, and allow me to transform. And in the beginning, I thought, oh gosh, like how could this possibly have anything good on the other side of it? But what it did get me to is lifting weights. Because when I was struggling with what am I going to do to physically take care of my body, since I can't go to yoga, since I can't practice asana in that way anymore, I started lifting weights because that I can do with shoes on. I don't have to move my feet a whole lot. So it wasn't something that aggravated the condition. And I am so grateful I got into lifting weights. So now I'm a regular weightlifter and I'm in my early 40s. So I know that's going to really help be preventative for bone loss and bone density and body composition over time. I have found community at my gym. So I live in a small community and I know a bunch of the people at the gym now. And since I work from home, when I go to the gym and work out, it's kind of like my social outlet for the day. So I feel really connected to my community there because I see the same people there every day. I have made some friends there. I've found how to practice yoga while lifting weights because yoga is really what you do with your mind, y'all. It's not what you do with your body. It's about what you do with your mind. And so now as I look back, I recognize that if it wasn't for arthritis, I wouldn't have cultivated this relationship I have with lifting weights. And at this point, lifting weights is like one of my greatest self-care strategies. So if you can stay humble and curious about how life might be happening for you and not necessarily to you, that is an artful practice of non-attachment. Just an example. So there's so many ways for us to practice non-attachment every day in little and small ways when it comes to an argument with your partner or a power struggle with your kids or, a disappointing outcome that your boss shares with you or even like political and societal strife. That doesn't mean that we turn away and we look away, and non-attachment is not an excuse to be indifferent and to just be apathetic. But non-attachment is about letting go of your attachment to an outcome and staying humble and curious that like you don't really know anything. So that's something that I have learned from my yoga practice that has been a game changer for my life, I would say. So I mentioned earlier that there are 8 limbs of yoga. I won't dive into all of the 8 limbs of yoga, but it's important to recognize that at least in the Western part of the world, we often think of yoga as something that's done on our mats, that you go to a mat and sometimes it even gets equated with, oh, you look a certain way and you're dressing a certain way and you can do certain things with your body. And that's just a bunch of BS because yoga is not really about just what you do on your mat. Yoga is about a way of living and a way of getting a hold of your mind. So yoga is a practice. Let me start there. There are many texts in yoga philosophy, and one of my favorite texts that I keep on my nightstand and I always go to when I'm just needing some wisdom and some humility and to be grounded is the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras, there's multiple versions of them. Yoga is such an ancient tradition. It started as just a verbally passed on tradition. So there is no one originator of yoga because it is so ancient. And when folks started to write it down, they were writing down kind of this tradition that had been passed along verbally. So the Yoga Sutras are lots of information passed along that has been interpreted and written down in multiple different versions and books, but based on people's interpretations of this. But the Yoga Sutras is kind of like one of the foundational philosophical books on yoga. And the Yoga Sutra starts with the kind of interpreted phrase in English, and so begins the practice of yoga. And some people find that first sutra is like, well, that's all we need. That sums up everything. Now, the Yoga Sutras is a longer text. There's like 3 core sections of it. So there's lots to learn in there. But the reason that first sutra can be so impactful for folks is because it really speaks to yoga is a practice. It is something that you practice. It is not something that you just do on your mat. It is not about a physical posture. It is a practice. And what is it a practice of? It's a practice of using techniques and strategies to calm the chatter of the mind. And when you can calm the chatter of the mind, then you can know your true essence and your true self. Those are like the first couple of sutras, I should say, rather. So yoga is kind of this group of various techniques that you can use to calm the chatter of the mind so that you can know your true essence and your true self. Asana is one way to calm the chatter of the mind. And if asana is what gets people to their mat, one of my yoga teachers taught me this once when we were talking about cultural appropriation and yoga and the Western world. And they told me, Rebecca, if asana is what gets people to their mat, then that's what gets people to yoga. And that's a good thing. Now, other ways you can practice yoga are certainly through studying scripture and texts and books. So I have a whole bunch of yoga philosophy books. And as my ability to practice actual asana changed, and like I couldn't really go to classes or practice vinyasa like I used to, I really got into studying philosophy. I've taken like a bunch of classes online that I probably wouldn't have taken if I was filling up that time with my asana practice. I've been reading more books. I've done some one-on-one studies with one of my teachers. So studying the philosophy of yoga is such a rich and juicy and rewarding practice because you're helping to build a mindset that will help you thrive in your life. And it helps you to see the world a little bit differently. Some other ways that we practice yoga are certainly through pranayama. So pranayama is breath work. So using your breath to calm the chatter of the mind because your breath can kind of increase or decrease energy in your nervous system pretty quickly. And so breath work is also a pretty foundational staple of yoga. Meditation, calming the senses, turning your awareness inward, chanting, prayer. I mean, there's lots of different ways that we can practice yoga. So know that asana, physical practice, is only one form of yoga. And if that doesn't call to you, it doesn't mean that you're not a yogi or that you can't practice yoga. Not at all. You can go after so many of the other realms of how to calm your mind with the practice of yoga. Now, there's a lot of different forms of yoga if you did go to a studio and you wanted to get involved in a yoga class. So there's hatha yoga, which is kind of the foundation of a lot of yoga practices. So hatha yoga really focuses on your physical posture and form. Hatha classes tend to be a little slower, although not as slow as like restorative or yin classes. Then there's vinyasa. So vinyasa yoga practice tends to be a pretty quickly paced and rapidly moving yoga practice. So vinyasa, we tend to pair one breath with one movement. So you're moving pretty quickly from one posture to the next and really focusing on your breath throughout the whole practice. That's what I used to practice every day quite frequently. There's also restorative yoga. Restorative yoga classes are usually in the evenings. You're usually going to lie down with bolsters and blankets and eye pillows, and the lighting will be kind of low. And it's all about just restorative poses. So you might just do a couple of poses in a restorative class, and they're really very therapeutic. So it's not quick. It's available to just about anyone. Restorative yoga is really, really good. There's also yin yoga. So yin yoga helps to balance out. There's the yin and the yang, and the yang and the yin. When they're not in balance, we feel out of balance. So yin yoga is really about helping to stretch your fascia. Your fascia is the connective tissue that wraps around all of your muscles and your bones. If you can think about maybe peeling an orange, the white stuff on the inside of an orange is kind of like metaphorically like the fascia that we would see if we peeled back the layers of your skin. So your fascia is this very thin layer of connective tissue that wraps around everything in your body. And when it gets really tight, it causes a lot of constriction for us and pains and aches. And there's the belief that tight fascia can lead to just a lot of blocking of energy. So yin yoga classes tend to be quieter and calmer, but they're not necessarily always easy, because in a yin yoga class, again, you're only practicing a couple of postures, because when you practice yin, you usually get into a posture for a couple of minutes, sometimes even 7 minutes. And you hold that posture in a way that allows your fascia to stretch and release. So for example, you might get into pigeon pose, which is a great stretch for your IT band and your glutes and your hips. And you might be in pigeon pose for 5 minutes. And then you do pigeon on the other side for 5 minutes, versus a vinyasa class where maybe you get into pigeon pose for a couple of seconds. So in yin classes, you're holding postures for longer periods of time. They're not like I'm going to hold handstand for 5 minutes. It's postures that really help your fascia to stretch. And so for some people, there's a lot of stuff that can come up when they do that. Sometimes getting that quiet and still can be really anxiety producing, or you notice how loud your mind is, or a lot of energy gets released from your fascia. So yin is also very therapeutic, but it's not necessarily easy for everyone. I would say it kind of depends on the qualities of your mind. But if you find yin to be difficult, it's probably the exact form of yoga that you should be practicing. And then there's also Kundalini. Kundalini focuses on some specific breath patterns and can include meditation and guided visualizations. And it's also a very therapeutic practice and can be very challenging in different ways. Not like I'm getting into a handstand. It can be more kind of mentally challenging, I find sometimes, and energetically challenging. So if you're interested in getting to a studio and practicing, getting into an asana practice, you could certainly look up classes online. There's lots of online stuff now, whether that's a live studio class or a pre-recorded class, YouTube certainly. If you check out Insight Timer, one of my favorite apps for mindfulness, meditation, and breath work, and they also have yoga classes on there. But if you go to a studio, you might check their schedule, see what their options are. If you're brand new to practicing yoga and you want to try a vinyasa class, I'd recommend like Vinyasa for Beginners or a level 1. You can also chat with the instructor there and say, hey, I'm brand new here. This is kind of what I would like to achieve with the yoga practice. And they can certainly, send you in the right direction. Know that not all yoga studios are created equal. So if you go to one yoga studio and you're like, I don't really like this vibe, don't just knock it, because they're not all the same, not by far. So I tend to really like the yoga studios that feel very spiritual, that have like a bhakti feel to them. So I'm trained in Bhakti Vinyasa. Bhakti is a Sanskrit term that kind of loosely can be interpreted as love and devotion. So my yoga teachers were Bhakti Vinyasa kind of based in their practice and their orientation. So I like studios that really feel like very juicy yoga. Like there's deities everywhere and there's incense and there's candles and there's like a vibe. And some people might be like, I don't like that. That doesn't feel right to my nervous system. So don't go to those studios. So not all studios are the same. You might like one and not another. So if you don't like one, don't just knock it completely. So as I've been mentioning, if you want to get into it, find a local studio. Align with what feels like the doorway for you to start practicing. So if you're like, I have no interest in getting into vinyasa, then start picking up some yoga books. Check out yoga online in texts and start getting curious. Kripalu is also a wonderful center where you can sign up for online classes, or you might go do an actual in-person retreat. Kripalu has a lot of yoga philosophy courses I have found. If there is a Buddhist meditation center or a Buddhist center around you, you might check that out. Now, while Buddhism and yoga are sometimes considered to be separate philosophies, they all kind of emerged from the same place. So there's a lot of commonalities in Buddhist philosophy as yoga philosophy. So that can also be a way to get your foot in the door. You might take some studies on mindfulness-based stress reduction. You might look up a class on the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras is just fabulous text. If you get into the Yoga Sutras, I don't recommend that you just sit down and you read the Yoga Sutras, like expect, I'm going to read the Yoga Sutras in a weekend. Usually it's like, I'm going to read a couple of sutras and I'm really going to sit with that because it's some deep stuff, y'all. Learning the Yoga Sutras can really be an enlightening experience. If you feel like the place to start is with breath work, then look up pranayama, look up breath work, go to Insight Timer. You can even find breath work coaches. I don't have a resource for that, but I know that they're out there. So start with whatever feels like the doorway for you. And just know it doesn't have to be your yoga mat. It doesn't have to be a pretzel. It doesn't have to be a yin class or a restorative class or a vinyasa class. There are so many doorways into yoga. You might just start by doing a deep search online of what is the history of yoga so you can better understand what yoga really is, because it is so much more than just going to a class and practicing something on your mat. In fact, the real purpose and goal of yoga is not about what you're doing in the moment to practice, but how you take that information into your life. So when you integrate the principles of yoga into your life, you have a spiritual framework that is at your fingertips to help you just make sense of the world, find some humility, and find your way through really hard and dark times. It'll teach you a plethora of skills to work with your feelings and your emotions. It will certainly help your physical health as well. It might benefit your relationships. If you're just a little bit more regulated and a better mind state, your relationships are probably going to benefit from that. And it can also support you find community. I'll say that when I was going through yoga teacher training is when one of the biggest traumatic events in my life ever happened. And I was in a yoga teacher training group with all women. And I am so freaking grateful for them because they helped carry me through that time. And if I hadn't had that group in that moment, I'm not sure how I would have gotten through that time of my life. So we can also find community with our yoga practice. I hope that this episode has been helpful for you to get curious about what yoga is and how you might invite a little bit more of it into your life. Until next time, namaste, my friends. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Thrive the Podcast. I hope these insights inspire positive changes in your life. If you're ready to take the next step in your Thrive journey, check out goodies linked in the show notes and on my website, RebeccaCase.com. Sign up for my newsletter and get access to helpful resources, connect with my community, and be the first to know about events and happenings. Remember, your journey from surviving to thriving is unique, and you have the power to create your best life. Subscribe, share, and thrive into your potential. Until next time, this is Rebecca Case, signing off. Thrive on.